why I became Muslim after visiting Palestine, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I want to share with you a deeply personal story, a journey that transformed my life in ways I never expected. This is not just about faith or religion. This is about a moment that touched my heart, challenged my beliefs, and changed the way I see the world. It all began when I traveled to Palestine, a place with a history so rich, yet so full of struggle. A place that is not just a dot on a map, but a symbol of resilience, of survival, and of a people who have held on to their identity despite years of hardship. Now, like many, I had heard about Palestine through the news, read about it in articles, but nothing could have prepared me for what I experienced when I set foot there. The air in Palestine feels different. It holds stories, it holds dreams, and it holds pain. And as I walked through its streets, visited its cities, and met its people, something began to stir within me, a deep sense of empathy, a deep sense of connection. I walked through the old streets of Jerusalem, stood at the Western Wall, and felt the weight of centuries of faith and history. But it was not just the places that affected me, it was the people. I met people whose lives had been marked by hardship, yet their eyes gleamed with hope. Their faith was not just something they believed in, it was something they lived. It was a force that guided them, that gave them strength to face every challenge. It was then that I realized how powerful faith can be. It wasn't about a ritual, a practice, or even a tradition. It was about peace, the kind of peace that comes from within, the kind that anchors you no matter what life throws your way. It was about surrendering not to the world around you, but to the divine. I remember meeting a young woman who told me about her journey with faith. She spoke of the peace she found in Islam, a peace that didn't come from external circumstances, but from the deep connection she felt with her Creator. It wasn't a peace that promised an easy life. It was a peace that gave her the strength to face the difficult days ahead. In that moment, something inside me clicked. I realized that my search for meaning, for peace, was not over. I had spent so much time looking for it in the wrong places. What I saw in Palestine was a living, breathing testament to what true faith can do. It gave me the courage to ask myself, what if the peace I've been searching for has been right in front of me all along? When I returned home, I couldn't shake the feeling. The words of the Quran, the teachings of Islam, echoed in my mind and heart. I felt a pull, an undeniable sense of truth that I could not ignore. I realized that Islam wasn't just a religion, it was a way of life. It wasn't just about belief, it was about submission to peace, to surrendering to something greater than myself, and in doing so, finding true freedom. I became Muslim not because of a sudden epiphany or a moment of conversion, but because I had found a connection, a deep spiritual connection that resonated with the very core of who I am. It was not about changing who I was. It was about embracing the peace that had always been there, waiting for me to see it. So, why did I become Muslim after visiting Palestine? Because I found a truth that I could not deny. I found peace not in a place, but in a belief that transformed the way I see myself and the world around me. I found a peace that connects me to something greater, that anchors me in the midst of chaos. And I found a faith that doesn't just promise a better world, but teaches me how to build it, how to live it every single day. This is my story, my journey. It's a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes in our lives come when we least expect them. But they also come when we are open to something greater than ourselves, when we are open to the truth, wherever it may lead. During my visit to Palestine, one of the most profound realizations I had was the power of faith and the peace that it brings. It's one thing to read about faith, to hear others talk about it, and quite another to witness it in action. I had heard about the resilience of the Palestinian people, their ability to endure hardship, and the unyielding spirit that carried them through times of struggle. But when I saw it firsthand, I was struck by the depth of their peace, a peace that was not tied to the external world, but to something far deeper, something spiritual. The people of Palestine taught me that true peace comes not from what surrounds us, but from the faith and conviction within us. As I wandered through the ancient streets of Jerusalem and visited the holy sites, I noticed how faith shaped the lives of the people I met. It wasn't just about religion in the way we often think of it, something you practice on Sundays or a set of rituals you perform. It was about a way of life. It was about something that anchored them, that gave them the strength to face the daily challenges they endured. And it wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving in the face of adversity, about finding peace even when the world seemed determined to rob them of it. I spoke with several individuals, from young students to elderly men and women, all of whom shared similar sentiment. They told me that their faith was not something that simply provided them comfort during hard times. It was something that shaped how they saw the world, how they interacted with others, and how they made sense of the injustice they experienced. Faith was not just a refuge, it was a source of power. It allowed them to rise above the circumstances they were given, to keep moving forward despite the odds. One of the things that struck me the most was how this peace was not a temporary escape, a fleeting moment of calm in a storm. It wasn't something that could be easily shaken or taken away by external forces. It was rooted in their hearts. It came from a place much deeper than circumstances. This peace was tied to their connection with God, their Creator. Their faith provided them with a sense of security, even when everything around them was uncertain. I watched as they practiced their faith not just during moments of prayer, but in their actions, in how they treated one another, in how they maintained hope despite the overwhelming challenges they faced. This was the moment when I truly understood the concept of inner peace. I had always thought of peace as something that could be achieved through external factors, by creating a safe environment, by having things go the way I wanted them to, or by escaping from life's difficulties. But what I saw in Palestine was something different. I saw peace that was not dependent on what was happening in the world around you. It was a peace that came from surrendering to something greater than yourself, something divine that guided you through the chaos. In the midst of suffering, I saw smiles. I saw families gathered around dinner tables, sharing laughter despite their challenges. I saw people sitting together in solidarity, offering strength to one another and offering prayers for peace, not just for themselves, but for the world. This was faith in action. It wasn't about avoiding pain or pretending that everything was perfect. It was about accepting the reality of life, both the good and the bad, and finding peace in that acceptance. I remember speaking with a young woman who shared her experiences growing up in a refugee camp. Despite the hardships she had faced, despite the constant challenges, her eyes were filled with hope. She spoke about how her faith had been the one constant in her life. When the world seemed to be falling apart around her, her belief in God had provided her with a sense of purpose, a sense of security that nothing else could give. She told me that every day was a struggle, but it was her faith that gave her the strength to keep going. Without faith, she said, I would have nothing. It's what keeps me going. It's what gives me peace. What struck me the most was how calm and collected she was, even in the face of so much turmoil. She had a quiet confidence that came from knowing she was not alone, that she was part of something much greater than herself. Her peace wasn't about avoiding the storm. It was about having the courage to walk through it with faith and trust that something greater would see her through. This is the kind of peace I began to understand in Palestine, one that is not rooted in the absence of conflict, but in the presence of faith. It's a peace that does not promise an easy life, but a life that can be lived with dignity, grace, and strength, no matter the circumstances. I had always thought that peace was a luxury, something that you could only experience if everything in your life was in order. But in Palestine, I learned that peace is a choice. It's a decision to trust in something greater than yourself, to surrender to the will of God, and to find solace in the knowledge that you are not alone, no matter how difficult life becomes. The people I met in Palestine taught me that true peace comes from within, from faith in something beyond the material world. It's a peace that isn't dependent on external validation or the circumstances of the moment. It's a peace that transcends the noise and chaos of life and allows you to move forward with a sense of purpose and conviction. I saw in the eyes of the people I met that kind of peace, and it was something I had been searching for without even realizing it. And so, as I left Palestine, I carried with me not just memories of the beautiful landscapes and the rich history, but also a new understanding of peace, a peace that comes not from the world around you, but from the connection you have with the divine, and from the faith that sustains you through it all. As I stood in the streets of Palestine, I couldn't help but feel a deep, spiritual connection to the place, a bond that went beyond the physical realm of what I could see and touch. It was an emotional and transformative moment, where I realized that the peace I had been searching for in my life was never going to come from external circumstances. Instead, it was something that could only be found through faith, a belief in something greater than myself. This epiphany didn't happen all at once, but as I walked through the old, narrow streets of Jerusalem, visited the sacred sites, and spoke with the people, the truth began to unfold before me. The more I engaged with the land and its people, the more I understood that peace doesn't come from the world around you. It comes from your connection with the divine, with the Creator. I think many of us go through life thinking that peace can only be found in certain conditions. We associate peace with comfort, success, or tranquility. We think that once we achieve a certain goal, secure a certain position, or find external happiness, then we'll finally be at peace. But in Palestine, I encountered a peace that defied these conventional ideas. It wasn't tied to a perfect life or ideal circumstances. Instead, it was rooted in faith, and it had an undeniable strength to it. This peace wasn't something that could be disrupted by external forces, no matter how harsh or challenging life became. One of the most profound things I learned in Palestine was the ability to remain calm in the face of adversity. The people there have lived through unimaginable hardships, but their faith has given them a strength and resilience that I found awe-inspiring. I spoke with individuals who had lost family members, homes, and possessions to the endless cycles of conflict and displacement. Yet, despite all of this, there was a calmness about them, an inner peace that radiated from within. I remember speaking to a young man who had grown up under occupation. When I asked him about the difficulties he had faced, he didn't focus on the anger or the injustice. Instead, he spoke about the importance of finding inner peace through faith, about how his connection to God had provided him with a sense of strength that no external force could ever take away. It was in conversations like these that I realized what true peace is. It's not about avoiding the storms in life, but about how you navigate through them. The people of Palestine demonstrated that peace isn't about having control over everything. It's about surrendering to something greater, trusting that you are not alone in the midst of trials. This kind of peace doesn't make the hardships disappear, but it gives you the strength to endure them. It's not about escaping the struggle. It's about facing it with grace and patience, knowing that there is a higher purpose and a higher power guiding you through. As I reflected on this, I couldn't help but think about how disconnected I had been from this concept of peace in my own life. I had always believed that peace was something that would come when everything was in order, when I had achieved certain goals, when I had the right job, or when things were calm and predictable. But what I saw in Palestine was the exact opposite. The people didn't wait for the circumstances to be perfect. They found peace in the midst of their struggles, not because they had everything figured out, but because they had a deep, unwavering faith that gave them a sense of purpose and direction. Their faith was the foundation of their peace, and it was a peace that could not be shaken by the storms of life. This understanding of peace challenged everything I had known before. I realized that my search for peace had been focused on the wrong things. I had spent so much of my life seeking external sources of validation and comfort, thinking that once I had them, I would finally feel at peace. But in Palestine, I saw that true peace isn't something you find outside yourself. It's something you cultivate within. It's not about controlling the world around you, but about surrendering to the greater wisdom of the divine and trusting that everything will unfold as it should. This lesson was not just about finding peace in the abstract, but about embodying it in everyday life. It was about seeing the world through a lens of faith, of trusting that even in the darkest moments, there is always light. I realized that peace comes from how we respond to life's challenges, not from avoiding them or controlling them. It's about learning to accept things as they are, and finding strength in knowing that we are not alone in our struggles. I began to reflect on how I had been living my own life. I saw how much of my peace had been contingent on external factors, on success, on approval, on control. But when those things were no longer in my grasp, I found myself feeling lost and disconnected. What the people of Palestine showed me was that peace isn't about holding on to things that are fleeting. It's about finding contentment in the present moment, in the faith that no matter what happens, you will be okay. This was the peace I had been searching for all along, the peace that comes from within. The people I met in Palestine didn't just speak about their faith, they lived it. Their faith wasn't a passive belief. It was a living, breathing force that guided them through every aspect of their lives. It was a faith that inspired them to face adversity with strength, to show compassion in the face of suffering, and to hold on to hope even when it seemed like there was no reason to. This was the peace that I wanted to embody in my own life, a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, but comes from a deep, spiritual connection to the divine. As I left Palestine and returned to my everyday life, I carried with me not just the memories of the beautiful landscapes and the rich history, but a new understanding of what peace truly is. I had learned that peace isn't a destination you reach after everything else falls into place. It's a journey of surrender, trust, and connection to something greater than yourself. It's a journey that begins with faith and leads you to the most profound peace you could ever experience. Before I visited Palestine, I thought I had a solid sense of identity. I thought I knew who I was and what I stood for, but something unexpected happened during that trip. I didn't just experience a new culture or witness a historical landscape. I underwent a transformation. And the most surprising part of it all was that it wasn't a transformation of becoming someone new. Instead, it felt like I was finally becoming who I truly was all along. My decision to embrace Islam wasn't a rejection of my past, but a realization of something that had always been quietly calling me from within. In Palestine, everything I saw, everything I felt, had a kind of spiritual clarity to it. There was something undeniable in the way people moved through their lives with purpose and surrender. I had so many deep conversations with ordinary people who showed extraordinary grace. I met a taxi driver who told me about his life under occupation, how every day came with uncertainty, but he always ended his stories with Alhamdulillah, which means praise be to God. That single phrase captured something powerful. It was a declaration of peace, of trust, of contentment, no matter the outcome. I kept hearing it from shopkeepers, from mothers, from teenagers, people who had every reason to be angry, bitter, or hopeless. And yet they were grounded, calm, grateful. That energy was magnetic. I wanted to know what gave them that strength, and as I sat in mosques, watched the faithful line up in prayer, and listened to the call to prayer echoing through ancient stone walls, something stirred in me. It wasn't just curiosity, it was connection. I felt as if I had found something I had been searching for without knowing what it was. It wasn't about adopting a new religion for the sake of change or out of admiration alone. It was about truth, a kind of truth that hits you in the heart and refuses to leave, a truth that feels like home. In Islam, I found a system of belief that didn't ask me to be perfect, but asked me to be sincere. It didn't offer me escape, but rather a path, one grounded in mercy, purpose, and surrender. That's what changed me. I didn't become Muslim because I wanted to fit in or follow a trend. I became Muslim because, for the first time in my life, I felt a complete alignment between my soul and my actions. I found peace in prayer, comfort in the Quran, and clarity in the teachings of the Prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him. It wasn't a leap, it was a return to the self that had always been seeking something deeper, something more real than the noise and distractions of everyday life. One of the most profound realizations I had during this process was that Islam didn't erase who I was, it illuminated it. My values, compassion, justice, patience, love, they weren't new, but in Islam they found direction, they found structure. I didn't have to give up my personality or my past. I simply had to allow my heart to open to something bigger. I wasn't changing myself. I was finally allowing myself to be seen, to be led, to be guided by a faith that felt like truth in its purest form. Conversion is often misunderstood. People assume it's about abandoning who you were. But for me, it was the opposite. It was about becoming more authentic, more grounded, more aligned with a purpose that extended beyond me. Islam taught me that life isn't about control, it's about surrender. And that surrender isn't weakness, it's liberation. When I let go of the illusion that I had to have it all figured out, when I stopped needing to define everything by logic and control, I found space for peace. Real peace, the kind that sits in your chest and doesn't leave, no matter what chaos may come. There were tears in that journey, some from joy, some from struggle. There were doubts and fears too, because change, even when it feels right, is never easy. But what anchored me was how every time I reached out in prayer, I felt a calm that nothing else in my life had ever given me. It was like finally being heard, seen, loved by the one who created me. That kind of connection changes you. It reshapes the way you look at the world, the way you treat others, and the way you carry yourself through life. I remember the day I took my Shahada, the declaration of faith. It was quiet, simple, no spotlight, no ceremony. Just words spoken from the heart, that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. And with those words, something deep inside me shifted, not in a dramatic or flashy way. It was quiet, like a door softly opening. And on the other side was clarity, not certainty in everything, but trust in the journey, trust in the one who knows what I don't. That transformation didn't make me perfect. It didn't solve all my problems. But it gave me the tools to walk through life with purpose. It gave me a mirror to reflect on who I was and who I could become. It gave me a path that I could walk, stumble, rise, and walk again, with the assurance that God's mercy would meet me each time. My journey to Islam after visiting Palestine wasn't the start of something entirely new. It was the uncovering of something that had always been there, waiting for the right time to bloom. And when it did, it felt like home, not because everything became easy, but because everything finally made sense.